Lewis Schmidt was Boss Cowman in 1977, and I was 17 years old, and Louis was born in 1900 in Hampton, Iowa, so he was 77 years old, and I was born in 1960, so I was 17, and we got along pretty well for a grandpa and a grandson.
He wasn't going to be, they had asked him, and of course Louis was one of these just out in the ranch. He isn't going to be in town, and you know, didn't want people to see him and all that. And they asked him to be, and he didn't want to be. But me and the kids kind of talked him into it, saying, oh, you know, we're so proud of you, and we want you to do this and all this, and everybody would like that. And so he finally consented, but he didn't want to. And of course, at that time, I felt bad that they didn't honor the women.
Yeah.
It was just the men, because I knew from experience that the women had to go through a lot too.
Yep.
And I said, they have their names on the loans. I don't know, maybe nobody else had that. But, you know, and things like that. And so I always thought they should have. And even like, if Emma wasn't out ranching, doing that stuff all the time, she was there in the house cooking and taking care of kids and
Yep.
hauling water and doing all that.
When my grandpa was honored, my dad felt very, very honored about it, and he was very excited to. It was the first time my dad ever brought horses to town, you know, that I can remember. We never did anything except ranch at home. We never I never got to go to rodeos or anything when I was a kid, and my dad never took horses anywhere. But when Grandpa became Boss Cowman, my dad absolutely said, we got to ride in the parade, you know. So we brought horses to town and rode in the parade and took part in the Boss Cowman rodeo and the festivities and all the stuff there. And because he was very proud that my grandpa had been chosen as a Boss Cowman. In the ranching display, we've got several saddles. I did take one of Louis' saddles there, the main saddle that he rode all of his life. It was an interesting saddle. They called him an old, and I don't know if that was a Miles City, no, it was a cogshell saddle made at Miles City, Montana. And it had the open stirrup leathers, so you could tell it was a cogshell. That was usually a sign. He bought that probably in the 30s, early 40s, probably in the 30s. Magnus Hauge had the saddle, and he was a bronc rider. He was a horse trainer, and he used that saddle a lot to break horses. It was called a bucker or a bear trap. I don't remember what they all called them. They were easy to ride. A horse that was hard to ride, it was easy to ride in it. And my grandpa rode that all of his life, and I even rode it a few times, just enough to know that it wasn't comfortable. It was.
Why did they call it a bear trap?
Well, the swells, they're wrapped around your legs, and when you got into it, it was you could really ride a horse that was rough in that saddle. And I don't know that my grandpa ever broke a lot of horses. He broke some, and I'm sure more than, you know, in them days they didn't have a nice gentle way to do it. They generally got on them in a round corral and let them quit bucking, and then they took off on him. So, but he had, as far as I know, he had rode bareback over to Magnus Hauge's auction sale specifically to buy that saddle, and he bought the saddle and then he rode it home, and he rode it probably most every day since then, you know, and I even remember him riding up into his 80s, and he always had to use that saddle. So it was a big part of his life, and that's why I put it in the museum. It has some history to it, and it's just an interesting piece of history. We don't realize it, but a lot of things that we just use on an everyday basis are important to us, and if we ever really think about it, lots of stuff could be in a museum, but it requires a story with it. You know, it requires why it's important to us and why it's important to this conversation, you know.